today's presentation, followed by 25 minutes discussion, and then we have photo section.
That's why I tried to look for the phone.
Okay. So please,
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, as I said before, thank you so much for coming, for joining, and for putting up with me all this time. And so you're coming to the to this seminar where I'm presenting research findings from these past 2 years of this PS fellowship. My postdoc topic was global stakeholder networks for impactful sustainability research and education at the community level. So I'm very intrigued about the role of the higher education industry and its stakeholders in sustainable community development. The outline of this presentation, so briefly I'll go through some background and I'll focus on the research problem. I'll present the case studies, research design, some of the research questions, findings, some ideas, ways in which I've been able to apply my research, and some research collaboration at UN IAS and internationally. So today I met Anna, but she doesn't know me, but just for people who don't know me, it's a friend again, and I'm very intrigued about exploring the role of the industry in sustainable community development, and particularly the collaboration between the industry and other stakeholders. So I've done that in the mining industry, so I have tangible outputs that were published before in strategic societies and industry. I've explored the role of the industry in the gemstones industry, and the diamond and mineral industry. On the public sector, some work I did in Angola with the Ministry of the government of Angola. The banking and finance, there was a work commissioned by the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China in collaboration with ESCAP, and higher education, which is the current project. I'm looking at higher education as an industry, and there are tangible outputs published in sustainability science and other outlets, and embarking on fashion and the fashion industry. So global impact, I've been able to collaborate over the past 2 years and before my GSPS fellowship with various organizations and in academia, the private sector, government organizations, and civil society organizations. I'm an innate networker myself, so that's why I just go here and there. I like to connect to people, that's my nature. In terms of the research problem for this specific, for my topic, my research topic in these 2 years, there are 4 key actors that we could identify that collaborate with the higher education industry: governments, international organizations, the private sector, and we have universities. What happens at the government level? Usually there are lack of resources, particularly in developing countries, that prevent governments to engage in partnership with academia. International organizations, sometimes some of the perceptions at the community level, what I found was that they feel overtrained. They say, well, we have many NGOs coming here, they train us, they give us capacity building, but those are repetitive. I mean, a very repetitive, it's a repetitive training. In the private sector, there is an interest in developing workforce more than really building capacity at the community level, right? And higher education institutions, in some cases there are irrelevant curriculums that they don't truly address sustainability or sustainable development, and now the Agenda 2030 is sustainable development. So my research sits here on this, at the center of all those stakeholders. Case studies, thanks to the ESD team for providing me the opportunity since the very beginning to reach out to the global network they have, RCE Network, the Regional Centers of Expertise in Sustainable Development. Initially we sent a global survey. You will find more about the research design later. And I also had the opportunity to do some interviews and focus groups in Japan, in Zambia, and Australia. So these are some of the photos of the case studies when I went to Australia, the focus groups. That was in Okayama, that was more like individual interviewing, and this was in Lusaka in Zambia. The research design of this project, I grounded my project on the Sustainable Livelihood Framework. And if you go to the original framework, it has 5 components. I adapted the framework to my research, and I specifically looked at the global context, collaborative governance, and the community aspect of the framework. This is a framework that I use for my past background research, and it's based on regularly, they are researchers and they are also sustainable development practitioners at the Department of International Development in the UK. Well, in terms of research questions, as you see, if you see in the research design, each one of the boxes has a research question. So for this first box on global context, I have a research question for this component. The second question addresses this component on governance, and the third and fourth question address this community component according to the Sustainable Livelihood Framework. These are the questions. So 4 questions. The first questions, as you saw before, the research design, it looks more at the global context. Where are the global trends on community, on education and research for educational research for sustainable development at the community level. The question 2 looks more at the governance aspects. So it looks more at the aspects that hinder or foster collaboration between higher education institutions and external stakeholders. And the third question looks more at the community level. So I ask communities and I ask also stakeholders in higher education institutions, what are the key capacity building areas at the community level? And I ask the same question back with a gender perspective, so specifically for women. The methodology. Well, I did an extensive literature review that involved various areas of education, higher education for sustainable development. As I said before, there were a few focus groups in Australia, Japan, and Zambia. The global survey that also involved 35 participants from all RCEs, and individual interviews with higher education, civil society, and government representatives. I also use different techniques, and that helped me to triangulate the information, the data, to come up with findings. So the first question that addresses this first component of global context is what are the current global trends and impactful education and research? And this was the research output for that particular question. This was a journal article that was published last year on sustainability science, and is grounded again on the SDGs. So we found in the paper, we found that, for example, in terms of gaps in Asia Pacific, this, where you see the gap, those are the current gaps in the region, according to participants. So we cannot generalize, we cannot say it's just Asia Pacific is like that. But for this particular study, that's what participants came up with. So the other SDGs actually are those that higher education in collaboration with other stakeholders are targeting. So they are collaborating already, they have programs in place, they have education programs, research programs on sustainability and sustainable development at the community level. This for Asia Pacific. This is the case of Africa. As you see, in Africa, there are quite a few gaps. There are only a few SDGs, 2, 4, 6 SDGs that are being targeted, in which actually higher education institutions have programs or initiatives in place. In the case of Europe, this is the state. In the case of Europe, according to the global survey. And finally, the Americas. So you see, in the Americas, they try to cover pretty much all SDGs, or like when you map all the initiatives, the community capacity building initiatives, they're pretty much covering everything. So So that's some of the findings, part of the findings that we presented in the sustainable in the journal article. Some commonalities among regions. We found that there is limited attention across regions. We found there is limited attention to these 4 SDGs: no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, and reducing inequalities. These reducing inequalities actually in Brazil, I mean, from the data that we got, Brazil is one of the countries that, well, one of the networks that actually are doing a lot of work on reducing inequalities. But there is limited attention across all these areas. The second question has to do with the factors that hinder or foster collaboration between higher education institutions and its stakeholders. So this is the second component of the research framework. This is a research article that has been already accepted in the form of book chapter, and the major findings are as follows. So in terms of hindering factors, participants, they agree the main key factors that prevent them from engaging in collaborative community capacity building for sustainable development are governance, the governance environment, context, lack of resources, and academic constraints. So let's see what the participants say. In terms of governance, there is these are some of the key factors that they found that are preventing existing collaboration approaches. So they found that the network is becoming very hierarchical. There is lack of trust among individuals in the network. It's becoming sometimes a closed network. It's bureaucratic, theoretical sometimes, with little impact at the community level. There is a lot of competition between different actors, so between universities, governments, the private sector, civil society organizations, and the workload as well. So they say we want to do more in the network, but we have a lot of work already at the university that we cannot engage in more. So these are the key governance aspects that are preventing stakeholders from moving forward. In terms of context, we have politics. So for example, cases like Guatemala is a country that was in war before, it's been in civil war as well. So those countries, that has an impact on the network as well. Literacy levels as well. For example, in developing countries, say, for example, in Africa, they argue that literacy is an issue to engage in the network. And there is also a gender bias. So, how, for example, senior researchers, more men become senior researchers than women, but that's another factor that is compromising the stability of the network. In terms of resources, funding is a major problem, well, in the States and in other places. I just mentioned the States as one of the participants, but there was in many other places. And consecutive resources, dispersed funding, so the funding is everywhere, but nobody knows where. Time also, they also complain, everybody's busy, so we don't have time to allocate to the network. Lack of information, they say sometimes we don't know what's happening in the network, so that's becoming an issue. And lack of institutional support, particularly from the government, at the government level. In terms of academic constraints, we found community engagement, for example, in the cases of Indonesia and Thailand, so like lack of research approaches that foster, that are more community-based, right? Lack of awareness and impact of the research that is undertaken in collaboration at the network. Community needs, so research is not really meeting community needs. It needs to be more interdisciplinary, more rigorous, the type of research that has to be conducted at the network. And a cohesive strategy, so they are lacking an approach to research, right? So could be what? So could be the SDGs, there could be other framework, or they are coming with another framework. So that's the main constraints. In terms of fostering factors, so these are the key fostering factors: resources, research approach, and knowledge and skills. Again, in terms of knowledge and skills, so what might help the network move forward is is capitalize and build up on these strengths. So there is already a knowledge. I mean, they have knowledge and skills that they can build on, and they can leverage that knowledge. There are also leadership skills at the network, so people can potentialize that with those leadership skills. That collaboration, if it is a network, we are meant to collaborate, right? Not to compete with each other. Negotiation, well, in terms of negotiation, well, there are negotiation factors that can be beneficial, and also there is a goodwill, so that helps to move forward. In terms of research approach, well, innovation, well, some research designs are innovative, so that's an advantage. It's community orientated. Indigenous, it has a focus more in indigenous people. For example, in the case of Latin America, there's a lot of focus on indigenous peoples, which they see as an advantage, and also is context-based. So most of the research that the networks undertake is context-based. And finally, in terms of resources, there is, in some cases, like for example, Italy and Sweden, we say, well, we have resources, financial and physical. And in the case of Nigeria, they say we have a lot of volunteers, but they don't have money. So you could see there is a huge discrepancy between developed and developing countries. So in developed countries, they say, well, we have some funding, but we don't have time, so they don't have people. In developing countries, we have people, we have many volunteers, but we don't have the money, right? So it's quite a discrepancy. These are some stakeholder perceptions that I capture. So say financial resources at the government level are limited, and so jeopardizing the sustainability of capacity building initiatives. People are busy, that's very frequent. There is lack of alignment with the SDGs, and there is a major focus on environmental issues, and if that is, I mean, some research projects that include social or economic areas of sustainability. The third question that I address in my research has to do with the at the community level, and this is research that was already published to address this question on the Journal on Sustainability in Higher Education that was published this year, to answer that specific question at the community level. So let's look at the findings. Well, at the community level, the priority areas according to participants are these ones. As I said before, we cannot generalize. This only responds to the participants that were involved in this study. These are some of the recommendations that are represented in this paper as well. Some measures. Community capacity building for sustainable development can have a greater impact if capacity is also built in physical assets such as technology, transport, and infrastructure. CSD initiatives should somehow be aligned with global matters such as the Global Agenda 2030, and higher education institutions should offer programs that reach the broader community. And are aligned with environmental and other areas of sustainability, science and practice. Finally, the research question number 4. This is another book chapter that was accepted, and that looks more, is the same question that I addressed before, but more with a gender perspective. So with women, what I did for this particular case, I want to do an experiment. I had some background research that I did on gender perspective with the same similar questions in the Colombian case, and with the interviewing I did here in Japan, I compared both cases. So I found that SDGs, for example, there are priorities for capacity building for women particularly, are SDG 1, 4, 8, and 9, and those are the capacity building areas. Generating, managing income, employment opportunities, education and training, work experience, and infrastructure development. In the Japanese case, these are the SDGs, 4, 6, 11, and 12. And the community capacity building areas are water, diversity, traditional knowledge, teacher education, sustainability, aging, and corporate social responsibility. What else we found in this piece of research? that community-oriented and women-driven agendas help women become more resilient to sustainable practices, and capacity building for women need to be also aligned with the global agenda, same what we found at the community level. Also, that consultation with women shouldn't be only the provision of information, but also active participation of women in those capacity building areas. And in both cases, I found that the needs, like women needs, should be looked after, which is quite a similar finding as the one in the community level. How I have translated this specific research into impact, which is one of the keywords of my research. Well, I've engaged in this network, which is a network for women in sustainability. Men are also very welcome. We have a magazine, an opinion magazine. We have a journal, scientific journal for early researchers. We also have in-house studies, and we have a radio and TV show. I'll be just chasing after some of you women to participate. Men also who are intrigued about gender issues can also participate. So we already have like 80,000 followers and participants across regions. So this is an example of impact research. Okay. Research collaboration at UIAS. Well, I'm very thankful for Professor Kanye for giving me the opportunity to participate in his lab as well, and collaborate with other postdocs and other researchers on some policy briefs. And also, I had the opportunity to engage with the former program on education for sustainable development in Africa, where there is a chapter that is coming up. I engaged during all these 2 years in many seminars, conferences, and talks, and I'm very, very, very grateful for the opportunity I had to present my research findings and to further collaborate with others. So I just didn't want to make it boring. So that's why I made a collage of different engagements and public engagements I did over the past 2 years. I'm currently engaged in international collaboration. So during my postdoc, I also got communications out with researchers from different parts of the world. I continue doing that, and these are some of the outcomes that are coming up this year. So this is currently the work I've been doing, and I hope to keep leveraging that network to come with impactful research. So thank you all for this time over the past 2 years. I'm very thankful to Hani Sensei for his mentoring. Also to Philippe, he's not here, but he helped me a lot during the initial stages. Thank you so much to Taiko-san, because I'm very grateful. I mean, all the work that you do for GSPS it has no words. Thank you so much, Taiko-san. And Hirohira, thank you so much for your leadership on the ESD team. I really appreciate all your support over the past few months. And you all, thank you. Thank you to GSPS Fellows for lunch gatherings, and probably we are going to have a meal in August. To the students, which I connect with some of you, thank you for everything. Well, Brianti and other researchers and program officers, thank you so much for all these 2 years of learnings, a lot of lessons, but a lot of good feelings and a lot of good energy from my end. So I don't want to be more emotional because I'm very Latina, so I know I can be very emotional. So yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Phil, and also congratulations on your successful achievement of many dimensions of work that you have done in the past 2 years. It's quite a lot of work that you have done while you're here, and it's quite impressive, and thank you for that as well. So I'd like to open the floor for questions, comments, and any input from your side. I was going to go first, but I saw the coming from.
No, so thank you so much, Mr. Brian. The presentation was very nice. I just wanted to ask, like during your interview, because you did a lot of interviews and also workshop, do you have an insight on what is actually working? I mean, like a good examples in terms of the governance of the SE networks.
Examples? That's
Yeah.
what your paper coming up. I can give you some input, of course. I mean, that's the idea, to collaborate. Yeah, actually, I can give you when it gets published. I'll give you the chapter so you have a look. But also, I can give you some insights about, for example, if you can focus on the factors that are preventing networks from collaborating. If you specifically look at those factors and ask them again questions, you know, what do you think? What are your perceptions on what are the limiting factors on governance issues, lack of resources, academic constraints, and context? If you can go over those factors and ask specific questions about those specific factors, I mean, you can get good data because it's already there. So it's grounded on research, so you can ask them. But in terms of governance, these are the key factors, I mean, that prevent them. So yeah, we can sit together and we can come up with some specific questions. You can send them back to ask them for more input. Yeah.
Because like the issues that Leticia and I are facing in terms of network governance is actually trying to identify how loose network can work effectively at what point. You know, if it's too loose, then the coordination is not really working properly. Like, in what certain ways the responsibility to be imposed on the
Yeah, I think what we can also do is look at, for example, which networks have reported more negative factors, right? And that way we find that there is something weird with this, with this network, so we can find a research on those specific networks. So when was the breaking point, right? When the network stopped working effectively, right? And ask them directly. That's what we can do. We can go through the findings and find that information to help you out. That's fine.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, so Isabel, could you show us the next slide? Yes, this one,
Okay.
for example, this one. So I was following up your explanation, but how did you reach the one word for each country?
Because that was designed in the survey. So we sent a global survey initially at the very beginning of my postdoc. And then we asked participants to report which country they come from, which network, which RC they were participating in. And one of the questions of the research questions was like, what type of factors, and I wanted them to give me specific words, what type of factors prevent them from engaging in collaboration with the RC. So when you go to the, say for example, X or Y participant, say for example in Germany, they might say, well, it's very hierarchical. I mean, the network is very hierarchical. All people from Nigeria, trust that's an issue that is preventing us from engaging. There are also fostering factors, so not everything is bad here. There are good things, there are positive things, right? So my recommendation is that, that obviously these are factors that should be taken into account, but what, for example, the team that you lead can also capitalize or build up on positive factors, right? For example, that the participants mentioned, such as leadership skills, such as negotiation, such as the knowledge they already have in sustainability. Building up on those positive factors can help the network to overcome these existing negative factors.
Thank you. But I'm feeling the reality is more complicated than one word.
Of course, it's more complicated. That's why all these factors, once the piece is published, because this is published, is a book chapter that has been accepted. I'm gonna send you the paper so you can go through the paper, because obviously I couldn't put all the data here. but I'll send you the paper so you can go in detail and
Okay.
find. Because there are more, actually there are quotes from the network, and actually there is more in-depth analysis in the paper. But
Okay.
this is just, I mean, I put it there just for the sake of the presentation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my next question is, what is your implication or suggestion on our ESD program after your research at IMNUIS?
Yeah, but my suggestion?
Yes.
I think yeah.
After your research here for 2 years, what is your suggestion for our program?
Yeah, each one of the papers that I published has recommendations at the very end of the paper. But I give you briefly, for example, on the first paper that we published on sustainability science, it recommends to look at sustainability broadly, right? So at the moment we are looking at climate change, biodiversity, and sustainable consumption and production. Those are the key things, right? So what I found in the stakeholders is that they request for more engagement with other areas. So for example, aligning the ESD priorities with the SDGs would be an idea, because regions are very diverse, the stakeholders are very different, and they have different interests. In Latin America and Africa, for example, I found that they have more, they're more interested in social aspects of sustainability than environmental issues. In Europe, in Asia Pacific, there is a strong focus on environmental issues, right? So giving them the freedom to say, okay, what do you feel more comfortable working with? Because actually they know the context and they know the community. So open up those key areas, those three thematic areas would be a recommendation. The second one is looking at these issues. I mean, Oki and Leticia, they are also working on another outcome at the governance level. So putting together those research outcomes, the one that I have here and the one that Oki and Leticia are working on, looking at those factors that are preventing the network from collaborating and leveraging the potential, because it has a lot of potential. That would be a recommendation. These are some of the issues. There will be more, as you say. I mean, the reality is more complex. But starting with these issues and starting looking at the strengths at the moment, I'll focus on strengths rather than problems. So there is already a strength, which is leadership. There's another strength, which is negotiation skills, the knowledge that they have from education for sustainable development. So how the ESD team can capitalize on those strengths so that they can transfer that knowledge across different stakeholders, including the community. And finally, at the community level, more engagement at the community level. That's what is lacking across all networks. So this paper recently published on higher education, sustainability for higher education, it shows that, yeah, like it's lacking, that is lacking more, that research across the network, BRC, is lacking more, is lacking community engagement. So ways in which, for example, the team, now that you have the new research fellow, she's very good at the community level, so she can help you framing more community related or based research and frameworks for the OLRC. I mean, you can leverage that potential that she has, and she can transfer that knowledge to across the ESD network. So those are briefly my recommendations. Obviously, going in detail into the paper, that would help a lot. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, thanks to you, Filipino Name, for the opportunity.
I also share some part of his first comment
Yeah.
on this simple word.
Yeah.
I think it depends also on how you frame
Mm-hmm.
that simple word in your explanation. So it's,
Yeah.
it all depends on the description. So how do you put that simple language in your description of this flower town?
I asked them directly, what are the barriers? Where are the barriers, the existing barriers within the network?
Right.
So that prevent them from engaging with other participants. When I was at the
How
community
many-
level,
yeah,
for
how-
example, it was different. The
How
wording has to
many
be
people
different.
responded to that question?
35 surveys, but that was 35 surveys, but focus groups was different. It was Australia, it was around 15 people, similar in Zambia. Here in Japan was more personal, individual interview right? So it was across all, like nearly 60 something people here. The rates, the responsive rate is not very high. I don't know if Chizian or if you have had any luck with the responsive rate from the network. It's not very high. So that also shows that
40%? No, a third of the RC.
Yeah, one third of the oil that's
yes, it's pretty much similar. So that shows that there is also an issue. If there is a third responsiveness, it's because there is also an issue in terms of engagement. Which if that happened to me, I mean, data collection was not easy. I had to sometimes chase after people to collect the data.
And it also depends on how you selected those people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I sent initially, it was a global survey that we sent across all these ESD RCEs. That's pretty much the same example, the same exercise that the Chizian and Pierre followed. And then I went to the specific where I could, fund myself and doing interviewing. I took advantage of conferences or when I went to do field work in Africa for ESDA program, I also take advantage and did a focus group. I tried to be as resourceful as I could to get some data, to get more data, to validate data that I had from the survey. Because if the level of responsiveness was very low, I need to validate with other techniques, like focus groups, individual interviews. Otherwise, the data was going to be not going to be useful, reliable.
So my question is, how do you frame it? How do you frame the responses in your chapter or in your research?
Okay.
Obviously, it's
yeah.
not
So I use
everything.
theory building. Yeah, I use theory building. So you go at the end, for example, if it's one of the research papers. So theory building, I categorize each one of the community capacity building initiatives from each RCE in alignment with the SDGs. And also I did the same with the quotes that I get from the interviews and the results from the survey. So out of that, what you do is to start building theory among those. If I had, well, I should have brought the chart. But after each one of the research papers, you can see at the very end is a matrix of data. So you compare that data. You have the SDGs, you have the responses, so direct quotes from participants. You also have specific programs on education for sustainable development or research for sustainable development, and you also have the global response from the global survey. So what I did was I compared, I contrast those pieces of data, and I started building theory. The theory building is a research technique when you use in management. It's used mainly, but that helps you to develop the papers.
So that means those answers are not by itself important, but your theory building is more important.
Yeah, well, the theory building helped me to somehow further frame these responses.
Right. Because, as also Taguchi said, it is, quite simple and too simplified to represent one, perspective from one country.
Yeah.
And different views must exist as well.
Yeah.
And that sort of perspective may also important if you really want to have objective information.
Yeah.
So, but not that those information is not useful information as it is.
Yeah.
Objective.
Well, the thing is with the factors, with the specific factors, for example, I found identify which one were more repetitive, right? As well. So when you do the theory, you have the metrics to see which terms are becoming more repetitive. Then it's putting all the data and also bringing people. What becomes more repetitive, right? And then from there, with Mr. Bill, that's what I did. And that's how I came up with the results.
What's the title of this chapter?
But
For this.
governance for education for sustainable development. Yeah.
All right. Any other? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I think you have contributed a lot for the
last 2 years.
Mhm.
That's really great. I think I have probably one of the earlier slide where you put the higher education institution. If maybe I think it's probably slightly music, but it is these four quadrants of actors. One of the earlier slides. So if yes, this one here. Should you? I think if focusing on higher education institutions, should you put this HEI even in the center and see how they're interconnected rather than put them as in some in the same something like this here. I think the same proportion. I think putting them in the center would be a way to probably reframe the thinking. And also so how do you define this impactful research, or is this impactful research or impactful capacity building from higher education perspective to community? As I took one example, I think you have an example from Indonesia, and they said the problem is, like engagement with community. I would argue that I think impactful research or impactful action towards between higher education, we need to learn from developing countries, because I think they are the one who usually even closer to the community, even compared to higher education in developed countries. That's probably how I would even see the finding. For example, in Indonesia, one of the training that they need to go, they even spend 3 months within the community just before they finish, for example. How do you see that these differences here between higher education in developing countries compared to developed countries?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Randy, for your feedback. Well, in terms of the higher education at the center of the stakeholders, I mean, a network is a network. A network doesn't have to be hierarchical. Some of the participants are right. So we can look at different perspectives and then look at different stakeholders from different perspectives. So, for example, in the past, what I did the same exercise but with the mining industry, right? Some of which the mining industry was collaborating with other stakeholders. I think the perspective as such, doesn't change given we have different perspectives from different stakeholders, right? In this particular case, we have higher education institutions. Obviously, we have a strong representation of universities. I think that's one of the characteristics probably that changes in terms of this particular research design. That we have more representation of academics and researchers than, for example, if the private sector is at the center, we would have more like business actors, right? That would be one of the differences. But in terms of the network itself, the idea was looking at how those actors are collaborating, right, with higher education institutions. And what you said in terms of the second question, that's very much true. I mean, at the community level, in developing countries, the work that we researchers do at the community level it has more impact because for the fact that we come from those communities, we have been able to coexist with those communities, and we somehow know the reality, right? So yeah, and the fact that some researchers there's lack of community engagement in specific projects. Well, that's a particularity we found. For example, there could be universities that have more focus, for example, on governance, on government issues, whereas others are more theoretical, which was one of the factors that actually we found, right? Some found that the researcher is very theoretical and doesn't translate at the community level, right? So when I mean impactful is that it includes the community as a participant, and it's also for the community, right? Yeah, that's very much.
Any questions? We still have Yes.
Please can say, yes.
When we have a chance, to talk, we always talked about the mining. So this
Okay.
part of the research is actually quite new to me.
Okay.
The one, maybe just a clarification, is that, in your abstract,
Yeah.
you say higher education industry.
Yes.
What does it mean?
Well, the higher education is an industry. I mean, more
Right.
often we see universities behaving like corporations. We need to attract funding, right, to be able to do research. I mean, here we're researchers, we know that happens. So it's, but also we have to deliver outputs. The business that, any business in an industry delivers. So we have to deliver now outputs that have an impact, and that impact is impact at the community level. So when we talk about, for example, corporate citizenship or corporate sustainability, I mean, the private sector is not the only one who has an impact at the community or has to be responsible for their stakeholders. It's the stakeholders. I mean, higher education institution now has to engage with its stakeholders. To give you an example, for example, in South Africa, recently when I was engaged with the ESTA team, and there is, in South Africa, they're asking PhD students to be judged, the theses are being judged 50% by the community in which they are working on, and 50% by academics. Because the research has to have an impact. And so the impact is okay, we have publications in higher caliber journals, but what is becoming more important is how we are translating that impact into at the community level. And early stages in my postdoc, we had this conversation with Sebastian, who's not here. He runs the vice director for the at the university at UNU. He said, look, we universities, we should, there are consulting firms who are taking advantage of something that universities can do. Yeah, like Deloitte, all these things, Deloitte, McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group. Those are, I mean, we could do pretty much the same as they are doing, right? And they are, I mean, taking the credit, they are even engaging with the community, and they are leveraging all the potential that they have. So somehow universities have to start thinking more in terms of business, but with a purpose, right? So it's a corporation, but with a purpose. And a responsibility with external stakeholders. I know many universities that have taken that approach. They're reporting, they have their own sustainability reports, and they're becoming more efficient as well. Yeah, so that's, I think that's...
So it's not about the difference between private sponsored universities and public sponsored universities.
Well, the thing is that we have an advantage, that we have all the grounded research, right? So the ways, the thing is how we can translate that into impact, how we can have an impact. I think we'll have good researchers here that are very good at that, or Candice and say is good at that. You should give us some workshops, Candice and say, how to translate that, all that, knowledge into impact. That's very important. Yeah.
Having an emphasis
Yeah.
on the impacts, I think if this, I think universities probably at different level may have, the way even the university build may influence the way their impacts is translated. I think, say for even when you, I think asking impact at the community level, maybe I think it's too much. So what I argue, I think with the RCE, for example, I think one of the current, it's a strength, of course, because it's university dominated. But to what extent, for example, do you see how does the way they organize the university is set up by itself? It's got funding, it's one structure. I think it will strongly influence the impacts.
Mm-hmm.
For a university like us, I think it's not impossible, but probably it's too far to expect that we will have an impact to the community. We will have impact on their policy, global policy, but maybe not. It's beyond probably our mandate for how we can design to have an impact on the community.
Yeah, and that's up to the individual researcher as well. Because there are some researchers who are very good at influencing policy, and if they are good at that, well, just stick with that. There are other researchers who are more into community at the community level and making an impact. That's also doable, I guess. Obviously, well, they even has intermediaries like governments to implement further those policies. But I think it's fine.
This is right.
Controversial.
universally important and controversial topic.
Yeah, yes, it is very exciting area of research. Yeah.
And also the way research results can be evaluated also
Yeah.
relates to
Yes.
this discussion. That is quite
Yes.
controversial and under discussion as well. I mean, impact
Yes.
factors doesn't represent
Yes.
everything.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's probably why I say that if we want to look at impacts at the community level, I think even higher education in developed countries needs to learn from developing countries. Because sometimes measuring impact through Scopus, then developing countries, they lag far behind. But if we start to put impacts on, to what extent we have one community, how long, and like measuring these impacts in terms of numbers of activities, then probably I think the landscape will change. Yeah.
It is a gradual process. I think what they do in South Africa, like 50% community as a judging panel for PhDs, and 50% academics dive into the work.
Yeah.
So what you could be like a list. It doesn't matter, the person can connect from externally. But for example, a person, if someone did say research in Mozambique, so at least a person from the community in Mozambique can connect remotely and say, look, yeah, this is the impact we are getting here. That I bet you that could be doable as well. I think that would be a good approach. I mean, some other academics might stick more to the theoretical side of it, but just respectful. Yeah.
It's quite difficult to measure
Yeah, it's true.
social impact.
Yeah.
And indicator is not really set.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
okay. I think it's about the time that we have to finish this. Unless any urgent questions that you have, we want to close here. And let me then finally give you this certification that this is to certify that the Bell Grant was successfully completed. The postdoctoral fellowship.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, it's nice. Thank you so much to all of you. Yeah, and well, now you learn more about the Latino culture, I guess, with me. But yeah, thank you so much.